The Honourable Kyle McGinn.
President, and I too would like to thank the Honourable Member, Honourable Sandra Carr, for bringing this very important motion that should be discussed in this chamber, and has been a conversation, I think, that has been front and centre in the federal sphere for a while now, and unfortunately I personally feel has been let down by a lack of leadership on a federal level, which I think would support states such as Western Australia and Australia as a whole if we had a federal government that was actually leading out on the conversation rather than just moving alleged or found to be proven people just move back to the backbench for a little bit of time out and then shuffle back into cabinet. That type of image sends the wrong image on what has been discussed in this House today around what we want to be seeing. And I take a lot of similarities to what the Honourable Wilson Tucker has said, that this job exposes you to things that you are not normally exposed to. And I too have seen since 2017 so much exposure to child sex abuse survivors from family domestic violence situations, which has forced me to grow and forced me to get more knowledge around how, why and what we're doing moving forward. Particularly out in the Goldfields region, I believe that it has put me in a position now where you end up being, in some situations, their last lifeline. And they go through the story of all the different organisations and people they've trusted to go through a process to find a better life. And a lot of the situations that I've encountered, you tend to be that last hope. And I think as members of this place and of the other place, it is our role to ensure we connect the dots for them. And one of the places I want to talk about that I believe is not just the dot connector, but is a leader in support and exposing domestic violence perpetrators, but more importantly, a safe space for women who are, having one of the most serious and frightening experiences of their life, is the Women's Healthcare Clinic in the Goldfields in Kalgoorlie. The Women's Healthcare Clinic, I started working with them back in 2017 when they didn't have a full-time GP in that clinic, something that I don't believe most women's healthcare clinics have. I believe we are actually trying to address that at the moment, because what that does is not only a safe space for women to go to get health checks, it's all the wraparound services that provides. And the CEO, Gloria Moyle, is an amazing advocate who is not shy on coming forward, I can tell you that. One of the best lobbyists I've seen ever in respect of getting what she wants to see in that space, but also a very good person at explaining to you the real life situation that we face. The stories and situations that she would have seen over the years would be traumatising for many people. But she had an amazing ability to bring me into the fold of the organisation and allow me to understand from a first-hand perspectives on the challenges that women are facing. And just having a GP meant that women were coming in a stream to get their checkups, but at the same time staying to talk to counsellors and talk about the bigger issues. And then that would expose, in turn, domestic violence situations. And I also will mention the refuge in the Women's Refuge in Kalgoorlie. They do an amazing job as well. Mandy Reedy, that's down there at the moment, she has been another strong advocate in respect of expanding the refuge and has worked very closely with our local member, Ali Kent, and has put in new playgrounds and new equipment that just create a better and brighter space, which this space too, just remember, and I know a lot of members have mentioned it, it's not often that a person goes through this once. They go through this many times, and I think the average was 7 times before someone could end up leaving a domestic violence situation. So the refuge and the women's healthcare clinic become a a safe space where they feel comfortable to go to. And that is important, particularly in regional towns. And I think there is a women's refuge I know of up in Port Hedland that does a very similar role and has done for many years. But it would be amiss of me not to mention the great work that they are doing there. And we also have, which was part of the strategy from the government, delivered a family domestic violence hub, which was interesting. It was very hotly contested by local organisations to run it, but when it came through and was built, it was done in a way that I can only commend the department and the people that won the tender. It has such a cultural significance in respect of feeling safe and comfortable when you walk into this organisation. They've taken every single bit of time they could to ensure that someone from the lands that comes in, someone that lives locally, will feel and safe in that space. There is culturally appropriate things that people wouldn't think of that have been thought of, and this organisation that's running it now is doing a great job. It is up the end of Brookman Street, and it is great to see that the government has followed through on that commitment and put the hub out there, which creates a space where it's a one-stop shop for somebody that needs to get assistance in that space. Another person I would like to mention also who has been a strong advocate in the space of not just raising awareness of domestic violence, but transitioned into protection against domestic violence, and that's Sandy Taylor. Sandy was a big part of an event that was held every year, and I got involved in it probably 7 or 8 years ago. It was called Walk a Mile in Her Shoes, and it literally means walk a mile in her shoes. So you have to put on high heels or whatever shoes you can find that will fit on your feet. For me, that was quite difficult with size 13 feet. But what it was where men from male-dominated industries and people that you wouldn't expect come out, put on women's shoes and then walk 1 mile. And there's a lot of women there in support. And I remember Minister McGinn was there in 2017, and there was just so much information and so much of a conversation happening. It was really inspiring to be able to go down there to support not just raising the awareness, but processes that are around protecting women against violence in the first place. I think the conversation has really changed over the last 5 to 10 years, from raising awareness that domestic violence is real and it's there and it's every day and it could be next door to you and it doesn't judge you on the colour of your skin or on your situation. Domestic violence is real, to now let's protect people against domestic violence, which I think is a really good indication on where we are heading. I do know the Honourable Samantha Rowe mentioned domestic violence leave. And I want to commend all the unions in Australia that have been, right across this country, have been fighting for domestic violence leave. The ACTU, along with all their affiliates, you constantly see unions now ensuring, because employers won't do it without being pushed, which is, in my view, a shame. But they are pushing, unions have been pushing for domestic violence leave because, you know, just think about it. Somebody comes into work fatigued or tired. You don't know that situation. And from what I've heard back when I was an organiser, where there was this young lady who was up until 5 o'clock in the morning in a domestic row with her partner, and then went in for a 12-hour shift on heavy machinery. You know, and it's not her fault on what's going on in the household, but yet, you know, may not have sick leave or can afford to take a day off without pay. But then there's the other situations where you need to attend court and go into court for an AVO or for financial reasons, and you end up losing money out of your workplace, but also probably putting yourself in a spot where you're taking time off and your employer is not aware of the situation. So the more conversations we have about employers doing the right thing without being forced to by unions, just putting it there because it should be there, I think will make that conversation a bit easier for employees to their employer, and more people will access that that right, which is what it should be. As I touched on earlier, I do feel as though we've been let down in this country, particularly over the last 3 years, on leadership federally. From a state perspective, it's been touched on many times where we're heading and creating the minister role and trying our absolute best from a state perspective. But to see some of the rhetoric and some of the games and political footballs that have been created over violence against women, bullying, harassment, women just being treated differently in general because of their sex has just been really hard to watch. And every time you see some sort of media grab from Scott Morrison or Barnaby Joyce, there is just so much insincerity in there. From my perspective, it is sickening. And I do not see, the member for O'Connor, Rick Wilson, doing anything in that space that's notable, nor calling out any of his colleagues that have been in that situation. And as I said earlier, it seems to be almost common practice with this federal government to just take a back seat for a month and then get re-elevated up into cabinet, which is just not on. I do want to absolutely add my praise to Grace Tame and Brittany Higgins. I've been honoured enough to hear Rosie Batty speak twice and talk about powerful. You don't see a dry eye in the room after Rosie has gotten up and given a speech, and I'm very glad that we have women of that calibre out there speaking out on this crisis we see across the country and across the world. Grace Tame, I think, has held herself admirably and has fought against, as we've seen at the press club, continued abuse on her actually calling out perpetrators. I think people in this, members in this chamber would be aware of the comments that Grace made around threats she was given about her actions after being awarded Australian of the Year. Shameful, absolutely shameful to think that would have came from anywhere. This is a woman who everyone's aware of her story. Absolutely disgraceful. And, Brittany Higgins to get up at the press club and give the speech that she gave, absolutely hats off to you and the work that you're currently doing. I think it's only going to make the place, the parliament better and this country better. And let's not forget, it's not just parliament that we see women mistreated in respect of violence or bullying and harassment. It's across many workplaces, particularly male-dominated industries. And one of the things I like at the moment that I'm proud of from the Labor Party's perspective is affirmative action. The affirmative action rules that are in place in the Labor Party have ensured that we have 52% in the caucus of women, which I think is a massive achievement and goes a long way to ensuring that people understand that it is changing. If we look back as you walk through the halls in Parliament, a lot of the pictures you see are just pictures of white men, and that is changing. And I'm very grateful to be in this day and age where things are changing, and hopefully that reflects across a lot of other workplaces, and a respect for family domestic violence that's going on at home in our workplace, and an understanding that your employer can play a part in assisting you get through this tough time in your life. It should not be a burden on your employment. It should be more of an understanding that when you are put into this crisis, into this position, that you have the ability to work with your employer on ensuring that you don't lose one of the very few things you may take away from that relationship, and that's genuine employment. So, again, I would like to really thank the Honourable Sandra Carr and everyone that has contributed to this motion. I will touch on one other part, actually, which I nearly forgot. There was a very worrying situation a couple of years ago, and I haven't seen another report since, but they introduced the cashless welfare card up into the East Kimberley. And when they introduced the cashless welfare card up into the East Kimberley, there were some genuine fears around what would happen. And I don't think that the federal government took a real hard look at what some of them effects may be. And one of the things that came out of a report, I believe it was by Adelaide University, was that there was a significant increase in domestic violence in the East Kimberley after the cashless welfare card had been implemented. Now, that's because they changed a system, and then the flow-on effects from that happened to be domestic violence. Now, that's a very scary thought. There was a lot of promises with the cashless debit card to have hubs, financial support, counselling services, because the goal of, they say it was to reduce alcohol, drugs and gambling. However, it's more of just a way to monitor welfare recipients on restricting 80% of their wage onto a card and 20% into cash. But what had obviously had happened was people were trying to get hold of that 20% cash, and people were being put into a position where they were either to give up that money or face the consequences of that. And I would absolutely call upon the federal government to stop pushing it through without understanding the ramifications that this cashless welfare card can have on families, particularly on vulnerable people in our society. And I know they have plans to push this card further, but I absolutely call upon them to take a step back and realise that when you make a small change, it can be a massive change for somebody in their home life. So again, thank you, the Honourable Sandra Carr, for this very worthy motion in this chamber, and thank you to the House.